Not to mention the fact that the feds are active in a Clive Palmer challenge against Western Australia when it comes to the border closure there. So there's spot fires all over the place. There is evidence of fraying as we see these secondary outbreaks across the country. I think it's really important that the National Cabinet, where possible, maintains solidarity. And I think, by and large, that's still the case with strong Commonwealth support with what's happening in Victoria in particular, enforcing the border there, obviously the Army in action in aged care facilities in Melbourne, which is really important. I think it's important that solidarity continues for all of us if we're going to get through this.
Yeah, but I'm sure the Prime Minister is deeply concerned about, you know, as everyone is, about the aged care crisis that's taking place in Victoria at the moment, because he's kind of being dragged into it. You know, it's the feds that control the aged care sector, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, again, I think some people have been alluding to this in the last 24 hours. I'm sure at a point down the track there will be a proper review of exactly what happened here. There's obviously the state's quite rightly focusing on the primary impact of their health system and hospitals when it comes to these secondary outbreaks. Meanwhile, the Commonwealth, as we know, has primary responsibility for aged care, and we also know that aged care was already going through a tough time across the country before this crisis because it was a subject of a Royal Commission which the federal government had launched. So we know that there's issues to do with substandard care more generally. So it's a bit of a perfect storm, unfortunately, that's unfolding in Victoria at the moment.
Yeah. Does it surprise you that Anastasia Palaszczuk was so quick in basically shutting the border to Greater Sydney? It's about 5 million residents, so it's a lot of businesses that perhaps had been relying on that. It's going to hurt them.
Yeah, it is, Peter. I do sort of sense that some of the outcries have sort of softened a bit when it comes to the tough position that Anna Palaszczuk has taken on the Queensland border.
She was proven right the first time.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, we've seen that terrible case again in the last 24 hours of those couple of cases flaring up now in Brisbane and Ipswich, which she's dealing with. So, you know, I think, again, probably finger on the pulse and quick to act, and better safe than sorry, because, you know, if we saw some terrible secondary outbreaks in Brisbane, that would be the last thing we need, and that would definitely not be good for business and for accommodation and hospitality and all those sectors operating up and down the Sunshine Coast as well.
We have been reporting this morning too, James, when it comes to super, it's doubled the forecasts. Those who are taking out the early super have doubled the original forecasts of the Treasurer.
Yeah, look, it's understandable, I suppose, that it's popular, these early withdrawals. I mean, again, this was one of the early stimulus measures the government put in place, and that was really before we saw job seeker and job keepers. So one of those things where, you know, I can see the short-term hit, but unfortunately there's going to be a long-term detriment of the country in terms of impact on retirement savings and obviously money coming out of the stock market, etc. It's going to be a problem for us down the track. And yeah, that's a big blowout, over 50% increase in what Treasury was forecasting. So again, there's a bit of ideology in play here, Pete. We've got the retirement income review is now sitting with the government. It's been with them since last week. So the big question about whether or not the superannuation guarantee should increase to 12% will be on the table again as we see that review come out too.
You know, what's interesting is despite all the tensions that are about at the moment, and we saw some of that yesterday at Osmond with our Foreign Minister and Defence Minister in Washington, along with the Secretary of State, speaking pretty tough against China. But then on the trade side of things, I noticed in the AFR this morning, they're talking about the fact that the Chinese economy is going to grow by 8% next year, which is great for companies such as Rio Tinto because they're buying up big. I guess that's kind of keeping our economy in the game at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the Australian-China relationship's probably been in focus like never before. I mean, really since post-Cold War, it's never really been in this kind of focus. And it's a real tough balancing act for policymakers in Canberra at the moment, balancing these competing interests and issues over national security, of course, human rights situation in parts of China, and of course that trade relationship which so many Australian businesses and jobs rely upon. That obviously is great news in terms of how China's getting through and managing secondary outbreaks of COVID, and that's obviously some really great flow on. And we know the trade balance is something which, by and large, has held up despite some of the bad economic numbers we've experienced in Australia. So we'll continue to rely on it at the same time as the Australian government's going to have to continue to push back very strongly with some of these concerns and with the China relationship.